Long before the rise of empires, kings, and recorded history, there existed a time in which the boundaries between heaven and earth were far more permeable than they are today. In the earliest Jewish traditions, preserved in texts like the Book of Enoch, we encounter the story of the Watchers, a group of angels sent by God to observe and guide humanity. These celestial beings, entrusted with overseeing the growth and moral development of humankind, held immense power and knowledge, yet their curiosity and desire would lead them to rebel against divine law. According to the narrative, 200 of these angels, led by Semjaza, descended from heaven to earth, taking human wives and teaching forbidden knowledge that humanity was never meant to possess. Their actions gave rise to the Nephilim, giants whose strength and violence terrorized early civilizations and introduced arts, crafts, and mystical practices that corrupted human society. Scholars date the composition of the Book of the Watchers to between 150 BCE to 160 BCE, though it preserves oral traditions that trace back far earlier, offering a window into humanity's understanding of divine order, rebellion, and the origins of evil. This story, blending history, myth, and morality, provides a chilling account of what happens when beings of immense power transgress their divine mandate, reshaping the world and leaving a legacy that echoes through both scripture and human history. The origins of the Watchers, heaven's guardians, become rebels. Long before recorded empires or kings, in an age shrouded in the mists of antiquity, Jewish authors composed a text that would profoundly influence later religious and mystical thought, the Book of Enoch. Within its pages is preserved the story of the Watchers, angelic beings sent from heaven to observe and guide humanity. The term Watchers comes from the Aramaic word irin, meaning those who are awake. They were not merely passive observers, but guardians entrusted with the moral and spiritual development of early humans. Scholars of Second Temple literature date the composition of the Book of the Watchers to between 150 BCE to 160 BCE. Although the stories it contains were believed to preserve traditions from much earlier times, passed down orally through generations before being committed to writing. These angels stood in heaven, observing God's creation, attending the divine throne, and fulfilling the role of intermediaries between the spiritual and earthly realms. They were meant to ensure that humanity would grow under divine guidance, learning the ways of righteousness and avoiding the paths of corruption. Despite their lofty purpose, tensions arose between the heavenly order and the desires that would soon challenge it. The Watchers' story, as recorded in Enoch, portrays them as beings both powerful and susceptible to temptation. When they beheld the daughters of men, the angels' curiosity and desire led to a fatal crossing of boundaries. In the earliest accounts, the angels were observers, yet the combination of pride, desire, and a fascination with mortal life set the stage for a rebellion that would bring immense suffering to the earth. The story frames this tension as the intersection of divine will and free choice, emphasizing that even spiritual beings are accountable for the misuse of their gifts and positions. The Book of Enoch presents the Watchers as more than mere myth. In these texts, they represent the first breach of cosmic order, where beings entrusted with responsibility chose personal desire over divine command. Their story was not merely a tale of sin, but a symbolic explanation for the origin of evil and corruption on earth. The angels' descent, as narrated, illustrates the dangers inherent when knowledge, power, and desire are misapplied. Scholars note that this narrative served multiple purposes. It provided a theological explanation for widespread violence in the antediluvian world, offered moral instruction about the consequences of rebellion, and conveyed an understanding of spiritual beings that bridged heaven and earth. The narrative emphasizes that the Watchers were not isolated in their actions. Their decision to descend to earth involved a pact, a collective agreement to defy God together. This element is critical in understanding the story's gravity. It was not a spontaneous lapse, but a deliberate choice that reflected both solidarity in wrongdoing and a conscious rejection of divine order. By emphasizing their collective responsibility, the text conveys the seriousness of moral failure, showing that corruption can spread rapidly when influential figures act in unison. This message was particularly relevant to early audiences facing social and political upheavals, serving as both warning and instruction. In addition to moral transgression, the story of the Watchers hints at the profound consequences of their actions on human civilization. They did not merely descend to observe, They interacted with humans, imparted forbidden knowledge, and altered the natural order. The text implies that human development was accelerated in some ways but corrupted in others. Agricultural practices, metallurgy, and even cultural rituals were influenced by these beings. These teachings, presented as gifts, were in fact sources of great danger, as they empowered humans to act outside of the moral and natural boundaries intended by God. The story highlights the tension between knowledge and responsibility, a theme that resonates deeply throughout the Book of Enoch. Finally, the story situates the Watchers' rebellion within a larger cosmic framework. Their descent was not only a human concern, but a matter that disturbed the heavenly order itself. The angels' failure and subsequent punishment illustrate that divine justice extends beyond earthly law. Heaven's response, as described later in the text, involves binding the rebellious angels and addressing the chaos they introduce to the world. This framework situates human history within a cosmic narrative, where events on Earth are intimately connected with spiritual realities. The narrative of the Watchers, therefore, is both an ancient history of early humanity and a theological lesson about the consequences of defying divine will. In these first chapters, readers encounter a story that is simultaneously mythic, historical, and moral. It establishes the Watchers as central figures in understanding the origin of evil, the dangers of forbidden knowledge, and the fragile relationship between the divine and human realms. The narrative's richness lies in its detail. It names leaders, specifies actions, and traces the consequences of rebellion across generations. By doing so, it provides not only a cautionary tale but also a lens through which to understand the moral and cosmic dimensions of the early world as envisioned by ancient authors. This foundation sets the stage for the dramatic events that follow, where the Watchers' choices will reverberate through human history with devastating effect. The descent at Mount Hermon, the oath of rebellion. The story of the Watchers' descent reaches its dramatic turning point on Mount Hermon, an ancient mountain at the boundary of the land later known as Canaan. According to the Book of Enoch, when the children of men had multiplied across the earth, the angels saw that human women were beautiful. Their gaze, once meant only to watch and guide humanity, turned to desire. This desire was not fleeting. It grew into deliberate action. 200 of the highest-ranking angels, led by Semjaza, whose name means "he who sees," gathered atop the mountain. Here, they swore a binding oath to one another, pledging that none would abandon the plan to descend to earth and take human wives. This oath, taken collectively, was a decisive act of rebellion against the divine order. It demonstrates that the corruption of heaven began not in isolation, but as a united and purposeful act of defiance. The choice of Mount Hermon as the site for their covenant is symbolic. Its name in ancient traditions is associated with devotion, and paradoxically, with destruction. By convening there, the angels mark the act with both ritual significance and solemnity, as if sanctifying their transgression. Ancient scholars suggest that the location represents a threshold, the liminal space between heaven and earth, underscoring the gravity of the angels' decision. In choosing this site, Semjaza and his companions were knowingly crossing the boundary set for their nature. The mountain itself becomes a character in the narrative, a silent witness to the covenant that would unleash chaos upon the world. Once the oath was sealed, the Watchers descended to earth. Unlike ordinary angels, who remained in their own habitation, these beings took human form and walked among mankind. Their arrival was unlike that of benevolent teachers. They sought to dominate and possess rather than nurture. The text of Enoch emphasizes their lust and ambition, portraying them as corrupted beings whose once pure nature had been twisted. The angels' presence on earth marked the beginning of a profound upheaval. By crossing the divide between the celestial and human, they introduced new powers, new knowledge, and new forms of corruption that humans alone could not have produced. The consequences of their descent extended beyond mere interaction with humans. The Watchers actively sought human wives, and this union produced offspring known as the Nephilim, giants whose very existence defied natural law. But the angels' rebellion was more than biological. It represented a spiritual contamination. By leaving their appointed place in heaven, the Watchers disrupted the cosmic hierarchy and challenged God's order. Ancient interpreters saw this as the first instance of cosmic rebellion manifesting in the physical world. The angels' lust and pride became the catalysts for widespread violence, social disorder, and the spread of forbidden knowledge, altering the course of human history before the flood. The narrative stresses that Semjaza was not the sole leader of the rebellion. Figures such as Azazel are introduced as principal agents, each responsible for specific acts of corruption. Azazel, in particular, is described as teaching humanity forbidden arts, from metalworking and weapon-making to cosmetic adornments. The teachings of these angels were not neutral skills. They were framed as corrupting influences, accelerating human violence, vanity, and moral decay. The descent of the Watchers, therefore, was not simply a physical act of lust, but a multi-layered transgression that included spiritual and moral corruption, leaving humanity exposed to forces beyond its comprehension. Interestingly, the Book of Enoch portrays the rebellion as both deliberate and tragic. The angels are conscious of their violation yet willingly participate in it, bound by the oath they swore atop Mount Hermon. The text emphasizes the collective responsibility of the group, underscoring that corruption spreads when influential figures act together. This depiction provided an ancient moral lesson for its audience. Rebellion is not only a personal failure, but can have systemic consequences when supported by a network of authority or power. The story of Mount Hermon becomes, therefore, both historical and instructive, warning of the dangers of seduction, pride, and collective transgression. The descent of the Watchers sets in motion a chain of events that will affect the entire human race. Their rebellion, oath, and union with human women initiate the rise of the Nephilim and the spread of forbidden knowledge. These acts disturb not only humanity but the very fabric of creation, forcing divine intervention to address the consequences. In framing this rebellion, the Book of Enoch establishes the Watchers as pivotal figures in understanding evil, temptation, and the vulnerability of both spiritual and human beings. Mount Hermon stands as the first stage of a cosmic drama in which heaven and earth collide, morality is tested, and the seeds of destruction are sown for the generations that follow. Forbidden unions. The birth of the Nephilim. Once the Watchers descended to earth, their transgression escalated beyond desire into action. The Book of Enoch describes how these angels, having taken human wives, went in unto them and defiled themselves, crossing a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. From these unions were born the Nephilim, colossal offspring described as giants and warriors of extraordinary strength. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 references these beings indirectly as heroes of old, men of renown, but Enoch expands the narrative, emphasizing the Nephilim's overwhelming size and violent nature. Their presence on earth was catastrophic, for their appetites and aggression surpassed human limits, creating chaos in every community they touched. Ancient interpreters often viewed the Nephilim as literal giants, embodiments of human fear and symbols of the dangers of transgressing divine boundaries. The birth of the Nephilim brought immediate consequences to the early world. These giants did not simply exist among humans. They dominated, devoured, and destroyed. According to Enoch, they consumed all the products of human labor, attacking villages and feasting on livestock and even humans themselves. This violent proliferation instilled terror and disorder, making life nearly unlivable for ordinary people. Agricultural systems collapsed, hunting grounds were overrun, and the moral fabric of human society unraveled under their oppression. Ancient Jewish authors interpreted this period as a prelude to the flood, a time when the earth had become corrupt and humanity's cries for justice reached heaven. In addition to their physical power, the Nephilim represented a spiritual contamination. Their hybrid nature, part angelic, part human, disrupted the natural order, creating beings that were neither fully mortal nor fully divine. The Book of Enoch portrays this as a cosmic problem, a violation of the law of creation itself. Humanity, which had been entrusted to stewardship and growth, now faced forces beyond its control. The Nephilim were not merely a physical threat. Their existence symbolized the breakdown of boundaries between heaven and earth. This intermingling of divine and human bloodlines created spiritual ramifications, as their actions perpetuated violence, arrogance, and lawlessness across generations. The narrative also highlights the moral corruption introduced by the Watchers through their offspring. The Nephilim learned from their fathers the secrets of heaven and earth, including forbidden knowledge that humans alone could not have discovered. They inherited both power and instruction, using their knowledge for destructive purposes. These beings became archetypes of chaos, combining brute force with wisdom that should have been used for good. Their domination of early human settlements created fear and reinforced the perception that divine intervention would eventually be required to restore order. This period, described as an era of giants, is framed in Enoch as one of profound moral decay and cosmic imbalance. The Book of Enoch emphasizes that the Watchers' rebellion was not limited to physical unions. By engendering the Nephilim, they transmitted spiritual corruption across generations. The giants inherited the pride, lust, and violence of their angelic fathers, amplifying the chaos and hastening the need for divine judgment. The text makes clear that the Nephilim's existence was a direct result of conscious choice by the Watchers, highlighting the cause and effect relationship between heavenly rebellion and earthly devastation. Humanity suffered not merely from external aggression, but from the consequences of celestial decisions that upset the natural and moral order. The proliferation of the Nephilim also illustrates the dangers of unchecked power, combined with knowledge. These giants, by nature and instruction, exploited human society, spreading oppression, fear, and disorder wherever they went. The Book of Enoch portrays them as insatiable and destructive, incapable of restraint, reflecting the consequences of transgressing divine boundaries. Their existence provoked awe, fear, and horror among early humans, and ancient readers understood them as both historical and symbolic agents of corruption. The narrative underscores that the fusion of power and moral failure, especially when coupled with forbidden knowledge, results in catastrophe. The birth and reign of the Nephilim set the stage for one of the most dramatic interventions in biblical and Enochic history, the flood. The chaos introduced by these giants, the suffering of humans, and the corruption of knowledge all prompted God to act decisively. The Watchers' actions, culminating in the creation of the Nephilim, had transformed the earth into a world where violence, pride, and transgression reigned. By describing these events in detail, the Book of Enoch provides a comprehensive account of the origins of evil in human history, linking divine rebellion, hybrid beings, and human suffering into a single narrative that explains why the world had become so perilously corrupt before Noah and the flood. Forbidden knowledge, gifts of corruption. After descending to earth and taking human wives, the Watchers did not limit their rebellion to physical unions. According to the Book of Enoch, they taught humanity forbidden knowledge, offering gifts that were never meant for human hands. This knowledge included arts, crafts, and sciences that dramatically altered early human culture, but in ways that led to corruption rather than advancement. The chief figure in this teaching was Azazel, who revealed the secrets of metalworking and weaponry, instructing humans to forge swords, knives, shields, and armor. While such skills could have been used to improve survival, in practice they fueled violence and warfare. Ancient Jewish scholars understood this as a turning point. Mankind had been given power and wisdom too soon, without the moral framework to guide it, creating the conditions for societal collapse. The angels also taught human women arts of ornamentation, cosmetics, and jewelry. The Book of Enoch describes how Azazel instructed them in the beautifying of eyelids with antimony and other adornments. Scholars of Second Temple literature, writing between 150 BCE to 160 BCE, interpreted these teachings as symbolic of seduction, vanity, and moral corruption. In the ancient world, such adornments could indicate status, influence, or manipulation, and by introducing them prematurely, the Watchers blurred the boundaries between natural human development and unnatural temptation. The cultural and social consequences were profound. Humans became preoccupied with appearance, material wealth, and manipulation, laying the foundations for societal inequality and moral decline. In addition to material arts, other Watchers revealed celestial and mystical secrets. The Book of Enoch identifies teachers of astrology, star knowledge, divination, and sorcery, instructing humans to observe the movements of the heavens for power and prediction, rather than for understanding God's creation. Ancient observers recognized that these teachings could easily lead to idolatry and the worship of celestial bodies. By passing down knowledge of the stars, months, and seasons outside their intended divine context, the Watchers encouraged humans to prioritize self-interest, control, and manipulation of natural forces, rather than stewardship and obedience to God. This marks one of the first intersections of celestial knowledge and human misuse in recorded tradition. The impact of the Watchers' gifts was compounded by the presence of the Nephilim, their hybrid offspring, who used both inherited power and newly acquired knowledge to dominate early human communities. These giants not only destroyed crops, livestock, and settlements, but also exploited the arts and sciences introduced by their fathers to terrorize humankind. The Book of Enoch portrays this period as one of unprecedented human suffering, where innovation itself became a tool of destruction. Scholars note that these narratives reflect ancient concerns about unchecked knowledge. Wisdom without morality leads to chaos, and early Jewish thinkers used the story of the Watchers to explain the origins of evil, technological misuse, and societal collapse before the flood. The consequences of the Watchers' teaching extend to spiritual and moral corruption as well. By providing humans with forbidden arts, the angels encouraged behaviors that separated humanity from God. Sorcery, astrology, and charms were no longer neutral knowledge. They became pathways to pride, rebellion, and the misuse of divine gifts. Enoch describes the Watchers as fully aware of the harm they were causing, yet they persisted, bound by their oath and ambition. This conscious decision highlights a recurring theme in the narrative. Knowledge without divine permission carries both spiritual and practical consequences, a lesson intended for ancient readers and subsequent generations alike. Historically, scholars link these stories to broader Second Temple apocalyptic thought. Written between 150 BCE to 160 BCE, the Book of the Watchers reflects social and cultural anxieties of the time, including concerns over foreign influence, moral decline, and celestial order. The Watchers' teaching can be read both literally and symbolically, representing the dangers of cultural and technological advancement without ethical guidance. The narrative provides insight into how early Jewish authors interpreted the spread of knowledge and power, framing human innovation as potentially destructive if divorced from obedience to God. This context emphasizes that the story of the Watchers was not merely myth, but a moral and historical lesson grounded in the realities and fears of its era. The gifts of the Watchers set the stage for divine judgment. Humanity, armed with knowledge and confronted by Nephilim violence, became increasingly corrupt, prompting God to intervene. The Book of Enoch portrays the escalation of sin and violence as a direct consequence of the Watchers' rebellion, highlighting both personal and cosmic responsibility. By teaching forbidden knowledge, the angels reshaped human society, introduced moral and spiritual dangers, and precipitated a chain of events that would culminate in the flood. Their actions serve as a cautionary tale. Power, knowledge, and innovation, when misused, can devastate civilizations and draw divine attention, changing the course of history itself. Divine judgment. The flood approaches. The corruption introduced by the Watchers and their Nephilim offspring quickly overwhelmed the early world, drawing divine attention. According to the Book of Enoch, the cries of humanity reached heaven, describing the terror, bloodshed, and moral collapse brought about by these hybrid giants. The violence was not merely physical but spiritual. Humans had been influenced by forbidden knowledge, seduced into vanity, pride, and idolatry, and threatened constantly by beings who were both powerful and immoral. Ancient Jewish scholars writing between 150 BCE to 160 BCE emphasized that the rebellion of the Watchers had created a dual crisis. Humanity was both physically endangered and morally corrupted. This cosmic imbalance demanded divine intervention. God's response, as narrated in Enoch, was deliberate and precise. The archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel were sent to report the chaos and suffering on earth. Each archangel had a role. Raphael was instructed to bind the leader Azazel and cast him into a deep, desolate pit known as Dudale, a place of confinement for celestial rebels who had corrupted humanity. Semjaza and the other Watchers were bound in chains beneath the earth until the final judgment, ensuring that their influence would be contained. This divine response illustrates both justice and order. Heavenly law is not arbitrary but enforces boundaries that had been violated, restoring a measure of cosmic balance after the unprecedented rebellion atop Mount Hermon. Simultaneously, God prepared to cleanse the earth itself. The Book of Enoch, together with Genesis chapter 6 verses 5 to 7, describes God observing humanity and noting that the corruption and violence were overwhelming. In response, a decision was made to send a great flood to purge the earth of the chaos caused by the Watchers and Nephilim. This flood was not merely punishment for humans but a cosmic reset, addressing both the consequences of angelic rebellion and the results of human complicity in sin. Early Jewish interpreters emphasized that divine judgment in this context is both corrective and redemptive. It preserves the potential for a righteous remnant while eliminating pervasive evil. God instructed the archangel Uriel to warn Noah, a righteous man descended from Adam, about the impending deluge. Noah was chosen because he remained morally upright despite the pervasive corruption. By following God's instructions, he was able to prepare an ark and preserve both his family and representative species of animals. This act highlights the continuity of divine justice and mercy. While judgment fell upon the guilty, provision was made for survival and the continuation of creation. Scholars note that Noah's selection represents a symbolic continuity between ancient moral instruction and the hope for human restoration following judgment. The Book of Enoch details that the flood served multiple purposes. It removed the physical threat posed by the Nephilim, who, although descended from angels and humans, had become uncontrollable. Their destruction ensured that humanity could have a fresh start without the oppression and chaos brought by hybrid beings. Additionally, the flood acted as a safeguard against the misuse of knowledge introduced by the Watchers. While the angels' teachings could have been used for good, their prior corruption had shown that early humans were unprepared for such power. The flood, therefore, became a mechanism to restore both natural and moral order, aligning human society once again under divine guidance. The narrative emphasizes that divine judgment was not hasty but measured. God observed the escalation of sin over generations, noting that the rebellion of the Watchers and the violence of the Nephilim had reached a tipping point. This long observation underscores the principle that divine action is both responsive and deliberate. Justice follows warning, and mercy is extended where possible. The flood was thus framed as a necessary response, aimed at preserving creation while addressing the consequences of choices that violated cosmic law. By situating the flood within the story of the Watchers, Enoch provides a coherent theological explanation for why human history required such a dramatic reset. The flood illustrates the broader moral and cosmic lesson of the Watchers' story. Their rebellion, the birth of the Nephilim, and the imparting of forbidden knowledge had corrupted both human society and creation itself. Divine judgment, delivered through the flood, restored balance, removed the immediate threat, and allowed humanity to begin anew under guidance that was morally and spiritually aligned with God's will. This period, chronicled in both the Book of Enoch and Genesis, serves as a pivotal moment in the narrative of human history. It connects divine oversight, angelic rebellion, and human agency in a sequence that explains the persistence of evil, the need for moral responsibility, and the hope for restoration through obedience and righteousness. The legacy of the Watchers: spirits, demons, and human history. Even after the floodwaters receded and Noah's family repopulated the earth, the influence of the Watchers did not vanish entirely. According to the Book of Enoch, the spirits of the slain Nephilim, the giant offspring of angels and humans, became restless and transformed into disembodied entities. These spirits were neither fully human nor fully angelic, existing in a state of torment and moral corruption. Ancient Jewish interpreters saw them as the origin of malevolent spirits or demons, responsible for tempting, deceiving, and oppressing humanity. Their continued presence on earth served as a reminder that rebellion against divine law leaves long-lasting consequences, extending beyond death and physical destruction. The moral and spiritual corruption introduced by the Watchers persisted in other forms as well. The forbidden knowledge imparted by Azazel and his companions survived the flood indirectly, embedded in human traditions, crafts, and early technology. Ancient scholars writing between 150 BCE to 160 BCE believed that practices such as sorcery, astrology, and divination stemmed from these early angelic teachings. By teaching humanity how to manipulate natural forces and harness knowledge outside God's intended order, the Watchers had left a legacy of moral ambiguity and spiritual danger. Even after the flood, humans had to confront the challenge of using wisdom ethically, a challenge rooted in this early period of transgression. The Book of Enoch emphasizes the continued cosmic consequences of the Watchers' rebellion. Michael, the archangel, was tasked not only with binding the rebellious angels but also with monitoring the spirits of the Nephilim. These entities, driven by rage and envy, were believed to influence human behavior, inciting violence, greed, and corruption. Scholars of Second Temple literature note that such narratives were intended to explain the presence of evil in the post-Diluvian world, providing a theological framework for understanding suffering, temptation, and injustice. By linking spiritual rebellion to human experience, These texts create a cosmic context for historical and social phenomena, bridging the divine and earthly realms. Human history after the flood reflects the lessons of the Watcher's story. Populations began to rebuild civilizations, but the memory of the giants and their destructive powers lingered in cultural memory. Early Jewish traditions, preserved between 150 BCE to 160 BCE, describe humans learning to fear and respect boundaries, both moral and cosmic. The giants became emblematic of hubris, and the forbidden knowledge of the Watchers was treated with caution. Religious authorities interpreted these narratives as warnings against ambition, pride, and misuse of divine gifts. The story shaped societal understanding of law, morality, and ethics, offering a historical lens for human failures and achievements in the shadow of divine oversight. The Book of Enoch also suggests that the Watcher's influence persisted in the form of moral temptation. The spirits of the Nephilim, coupled with remnants of forbidden knowledge, provided humanity with the capacity for both advancement and corruption. This dual potential illustrates the narrative's central concern. Knowledge and power are not inherently evil, but without ethical guidance and accountability, they become instruments of destruction. The text repeatedly emphasizes that humans must navigate a world shaped by divine rebellion, inherited corruption, and moral complexity. Ancient authors frame this struggle not as abstract philosophy, but as a lived reality, connecting celestial events with human history in a tangible and instructive manner. Scholars also note that the Watcher's legacy influenced later religious and mystical thought. Early Christian writers, including those responsible for the Epistle of Jude, referenced Enochic traditions, acknowledging the angel's rebellion and the coming judgment. By situating these stories within post-flood history, the narratives reinforced the concept of divine justice and moral responsibility. They offered a framework for understanding the origins of evil, the persistence of temptation, and the consequences of disobedience, linking past events to ongoing spiritual and ethical challenges. Even outside canonical texts, the Watcher's story informed cultural memory, shaping beliefs about angels, demons, and the interplay between spiritual and human realms. The legacy of the Watchers serves as a moral and historical bridge between the antediluvian world and the post-diluvian era. Their rebellion, the rise of the Nephilim, and the imparting of forbidden knowledge created patterns of corruption that humans would continue to confront for generations. By detailing both the cosmic and human consequences of these actions, the Book of Enoch provides an interpretive lens through which later societies understood history, law, morality, and divine justice. The story underscores a profound truth. The actions of powerful beings leave traces that persist far beyond their lifetimes, shaping the trajectory of civilizations and the moral challenges of humanity. In this way, the Watcher's rebellion is not merely a tale of the distant past, but a continuing influence on human history and spiritual understanding.